Hand for the Mud Flappers. Don't go anywhere, they will be back to sing a weirder set, right?
Oh, yeah.
Always. So it's going to get weirder and better and hotter. I don't know how they're pulling it off with the garb. It looks very warm. So go get some food and some water. And how about another hand for Melissa? The brunch was amazing. Thanks to Neighbors and to Cafe Vinci for hosting us. If you haven't gotten the chance to chat with the folks at DeLand Pride or to talk with Cecil at Collective Cares, feel free to go chat with them. I want to open our Soul Brunch sermon with something that one of my friends, a good friend, wrote this week. She works with deeply troubled youth in an Outward Bound program in the mountains of North Carolina. She was raised in a Christian family, going to church, and when she came out, she was rejected and essentially lost her family. Is this cut now?
A little bit.
Maybe? A little bit? Can we just grab one off the stage?
Yeah.
Stand by. Technical difficulties. All right, better? Sweet, excellent. So,
Turn it up a little.
okay, a little more. It's gonna tune me up. A little more. Testing, 1, 2. Yeah, okay. Yeah, got it, right there. Excellent. So I was saying my friend grew up in a religious family and came out and was rejected and essentially lost her family. And I'm grateful that while she lived in town, was able to find some belonging with Collective and a group of friends, and even as she's been out of town, been able to stay connected. So she wrote this week, and I think this was moving to me, so I wanted to share it and kind of I think leads into what I think we can reflect on today. So she says, I worked with a teenage girl this week whose parents sent her to reparative therapy camp to pray the gay away. I worked with a teenage girl this week who doesn't feel safe in her own home because her siblings are homophobic and her parents are oppressively religious. I worked with a teenage girl this week who isn't allowed to be who she is and love who she loves, who's being held hostage with hate by those who quote-unquote love her the most. I worked with a teenage girl this week whose fists and jaw are clenched and who holds back tears constantly to be strong in the face of abuse and rejection. I worked with a teenage girl this week who struggles with anxiety, depression, self-hate, and suicidality, who rarely makes eye contact and doesn't know how to respond to love and care. I worked with a teenage girl this week who is a daughter to people who preach love and who is now in treatment partly because of how she's been treated by these same people. I worked with a teenage girl this week who shared her beautiful and courageous life story. She says, I love my job. It simultaneously brings me life and breaks my heart. I cannot understand how we can use the name of love to hurt, exclude, push away, reject, and hate others. Love is love. Love is not hate. Let's call them what they are and use them correctly. Let's choose love. So I reflected on this. It's beautiful to me, even though I struggle to understand how people can take such deep loss and rejection, and she's essentially lost her family, and channel that into the courageous work of healing those same kinds of hurt. And it got me thinking about, a handful of us have been working on a Keep Dancing video. This week we're going to start shooting it next week. Have you seen these, the Keep Dancing Orlando videos? Yeah, great. Really, really cool. Brilliant videos. They capture sort of the resolve and the hope in the aftermath of Pulse, and it's a really neat, powerful way to do it. And then at Collective's Vigil, the week after the Pulse shooting, Luis, who you all met earlier, he wrote a piece called Dancing Queer that was published in The Beacon about the power of dance in the formation and expression of the queer community. And all this stuff has me thinking, where does this come from, this hope? Where does that sort of indomitable spirit come from that can lose, that can suffer attack, that can be victimized by hate and terror, and somehow respond with a call to dance? Initially, I feel like my reaction was, isn't this inappropriate? Or isn't it at least too soon? Aren't the emotions still too raw? Aren't the nerves still too frayed? How can we dance? How can we sing? How can we celebrate? It gets harder because even as we defy that impulse to sort of crumple into a heap on the ground, to pull the blinds and lock the door and never come out, even though we're able to sort of defy that crushing gravity of grief, and we can will ourselves to get up and dance, at the same time there are more bombings and more terror and more shootings and more systemic racism and the heartbreaking truth that we have to be reminded that Black lives matter. More active shooters, more distrust and division with law enforcement. And so yeah, how can we keep dancing in Orlando, but how can we dance at all? The Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel died this past week. He came and spoke to my small freshman seminar class in the fall of 2000 about the aftermath of horror. And he says, I'm a pessimist because I don't trust history, but at the same time I'm an optimist. Out of despair, one creates. What else can we do? Even with no good reason to go on living, you must go on living. In a world of unhappiness, you must create happiness. The Danish philosopher Søren Kierkegaard reflects on suffering this way. He says, what is a poet? Someone who harbors deep anguish in their hearts, but whose lips are so formed that when they cry out, it sounds like lovely music. So where does this come from? How can we keep dancing? This actually comes from our loss. We dance and sing precisely because as we cry out, the shape of the grief of the LGBTQ community and their allies becomes a thing of beauty. It becomes a work of art, communally. It becomes like lovely music. So we can admit that we are heartbroken people. We have deep anguish in our hearts. But the hope is that our lips and our bodies and our souls are so formed that as we cry out, we might create some beautiful works of healing. Dancing then, singing, celebrating, these are not pretending everything is fine. This is not covering it up. In fact, this is digging all the way down and crying out from that deepest expression of loss and hurt. We dance not in spite of, but as an expression of this deep hurt. This is the defiant cry of lament that becomes the truest shape of any song of hope. So one of the central narratives, not only of the Christian faith, but many religions, is resurrection. So this ridiculous assertion that somehow life can go on after death, after tragedy, and the aftermath of devastation. And not as a one-off miracle that has to prove something about Jesus. Instead, it's a central story in the Christian faith and in other traditions that reveals and reminds us of how reality works. Always moving toward life again. And this is entirely evident in the physical universe. If you just look at the world around you, this is what is happening everywhere and all the time, and we just happen to call this by the name of God. It's not a supernatural miracle. Instead, this is the enduring relationship between death and life, between loss and the way that life seems to do more than merely survive, but to somehow actually grow beauty out of the darkest soil. The queer community and their allies have witnessed to this kind of resurrection in more beautiful and colorful and powerful ways than the church is often able to in so many ways. Overcoming loss with solidarity and communal strength, overcoming darkness with overwhelming color and light, overcoming paralyzing grief with defiant dancing and singing, overcoming fear with bravery and joy, overcoming helplessness with a work of hope. That a better world, a safer world is possible. And so if the central hope, one of the central hopes of the Christian faith is that death is not the last word, then the Christian tradition actually needs to sit out for a moment and take a lesson. To allow this good news to be preached to us through the love and the lives and the dancing and the marching and the pride and the solidarity that have swollen exponentially in the face of unbearable tragedy, that have swallowed the deepest darkness, and from those depths have cried out, this moment does not define us. We live on. Death is not the last word. Keep dancing. Amen.